welcome to Dirt, Sweat, and Gears and the homestead of Hopeless Heaps. We are here with the Prelude, and while I was not planning to work on the Prelude, I guess it got jealous because I finally got around to working on the Camaro. So if you're here for Camaro content, just stand by. It's going to happen. I am working on it right now. As you can see, we've got something really cool happening over here that we are going to talk about when it's time to talk about the Camaro. But right now we're going to talk about the Prelude. So in my last couple of videos with this Prelude, we just got through a whole lot of work. We completely rebuilt the stereo system. We also completely rebuilt the air conditioning. And the air conditioning was really long and involved and led us down all of the rabbit holes to fixing a very, very broken system. And now the air conditioning works great. The stereo sounds great. We've added some things to make it sound really great. It's really fun to drive, but there's a problem. You go to park it and it won't start. So I have a hypothesis on this. You see, in the past couple of years, we have been doing lots and lots of upgrades, specifically around the electrical system. It turns out each of these cooling fans needed a 30 amp circuit to run each of them, in order to not melt or break fuses or, melt relays and start fires, which is kind of insane. And when you match that up with the 40 amps that the stereo is pulling off of our 1.2 farad capacitor, and then you add in the lights when you're driving at night, and this alternator is kind of struggling to keep up. I do have a 94 Accord alternator, which is supposedly running 90 amps. However, it's an AutoZone rebuild. You can't trust AutoZone rebuilds. So in this video, we're going to do a proper diagnostic to test my hypothesis. And if that is true, we're going to pull this alternator out, take it down to a rebuild shop to have it rebuilt properly. And if you can, we're going to upgrade it. So before we go spending money on this thing, we want to test our hypothesis. So I've got my battery tester here, and we're going to start with a battery test. This is an AGM battery, and we've got 725 cold cranking amps. I've verified this before. And we're going to test this. So it says healthy with 100%, but with a 13% charge. So we may have a parasitic loss in addition to everything else, because I tested this a couple of days ago, and it had 50%. So coming home, I parked this thing straight from driving home for 40 miles. And I was at a 50% charge. So that tells me that we're not properly charging. We should put a charge on this, and then we're going to do further tests. We want to do a proper health check on the battery and on the charging system so we know exactly what's going on. I wanted to eliminate any possibility of parasitic loss in this charging system. So I removed the capacitor from the circuit. They say on the internet that a capacitor really doesn't do anything, and I can see the logic in that. So for now, I just undid the wires and hooked the stereo wire directly up to it. But since that breaker is off, the stereo is not drawing anything from the battery to begin with. So we should not have any parasitic draw. The battery has been charging overnight, so we're going to do a battery test, and then we're going to test our charging and starting systems. So our charge is showing 65% state of charge and 72% battery health, which is a little concerning because it should show 100% state of charge. It was charging overnight. It does say 72% healthy, which is also a little bit concerning considering this is a much newer battery. It should be closer to 90, but okay, it's fair enough. The capacitor, if it was giving a parasitic loss, it is safe to assume that it has taken its toll on the battery during that time. So the next thing we want to do is a cranking test. So we're going to start the car, and we have 30 seconds to do that, and it is going to test our starting system. Now it says it's good at 11.26 volts. So let's move on to the charging system test. So it's going to want me to rev the engine at 2,500 RPM once it completes this ripple test. Look at that. It says loaded 13.75 volts, unloaded 13.81 volts, ripple 13 millivolts. So it says charging normal. So we're going to do this next test with everything on. I'm talking the lights, the air conditioner, the music, everything. All right, everything is on. We've got some music going. AC is on. The lights are on. We're going to do another charging test. Derp. Yeah. All right, we'll shut it down. This is the readout that concerns me a little bit. When the car is running and under load with everything on, it seems like we're not getting enough voltage coming back into the battery. So what do we do about this? Well, I could spend the money and upgrade the alternator. But before I do that, there's one last thing I want to try. Let's go up to the front of the car. We're working back in the dark because, of course, my electrician is spending 4 days doing 4 hours of work. So we're working with the best we got here. You see here, we have, I'm pointing the light directly at it, my fuse box. And off to the left, this big wire that's wrapped in red, that's going out to the bus bar, to the battery, to the starter, and, you know, all to the car's happy systems. But to the right of that is the alternator charge cable. You can see these wires are very different sizes. The wire going to the alternator, I believe, is like a 4 gauge, and the wire going to the battery is a 0 gauge. So I have picked up a 0 gauge wire that we can hook up to the alternator. The only real challenge to this is that this connector is a little bit too big to fit inside the fuse box. So I'm going to have to get some power tools, somehow figure out how to power my power tools because, you know, I don't have any electricity back here. I'm going to have to grind this down a little bit so that it can fit in this slot. I may have to trim away at the plastic just a little bit here. I want to avoid doing that though. And then I'll be able to run my 0 gauge wire, just basically replace the alternator charge cable that I have running here, all along here, and over to the alternator. And if that doesn't do it, then we will take the alternator to a rebuilder because we're not going to AutoZone ever again for this kind of stuff. Well, obviously this is a temporary arrangement here, but I have upgraded the alternator cable to this 0 gauge wire. I do have more conduit to wrap around this. It's not going to be perfect because the sheeting to this is actually a lot thicker than this other wire, but we got everything cleaned up here as well. I got the connector to fit. I did have to trim just a little bit, a couple of tabs off of this box in order to get this to fit in here, but it was not that big of a deal. It was just a little bit of, you know, cutting here and there with a razor blade, and of course I modified the connector itself to trim it down to make it slim enough to fit. So before I run this correctly, let's go to the back of the car and start our battery charge test. And of course the music is loud because we want to actually draw a significant amount of power from the stereo system. So we're going to do charging test. Get my leg out from behind the exhaust. Okay, I've shut it down because it was loud. So we've tested at unloaded 12.97 and loaded 12.9 volts. So with the lights on and with the music going, we are low charging. We're not charging enough. So that is obviously a problem if I want to have my lights on and my stereo running. Go figure. So it's pretty obvious by now, I need to have my alternator rebuilt and, if possible, upgraded. We're definitely not taking this thing back to AutoZone because I'm just going to get another AutoZone rebuild that is going to continue to fail me. We're going to take it to a rebuild shop and they're going to do a good job with it. So let's unhook all of this, get our alternator out, and get it down to the shop. I got the new alternator from R&R Electric in Sun Valley. Of course, it looks really good,
But personally, I don't care how it looks. It's going in the car. I want it to perform. But it does spin nice and freely, so that's a very good sign. Let's get this thing in the car so that we can find out if I just wasted my money or not. And while we're on the topic, this is about half the price of getting a rebuilt alternator from AutoZone. So that just proves that when you get in the zone, you're buying the warranty, not the part. I do still have the warranty with AutoZone, so if I decide, screw this guy, I'm going to go back to AutoZone, I absolutely can. But if this performs the way I want it to perform, this guy might be my new alternator guy. He also rebuilds starters too, so alternator, starters, electrical components. He is an expert. But like I said, I've never worked with him before. This is my first time, so let's give this a shot. We have our beautiful new alternator installed. It sure looks good. It's going to present really well at Radwood in a couple weeks. We're going to clean all of this up in just a minute, but I want to make sure that this thing performs. So we're going to put the camera down back on the tripod, and we're going to do our battery tests. And what are our results? Oh my God. Unloaded 14.10 volts, loaded 14.09. This, my friends, was a success right here. So it turned out to be the alternator all along. And while I could have just gone and replaced the alternator, some of the other things we did were beneficial, like upgrading this wire to 0 gauge. We saw almost an entire volt of difference when we upgraded this from our old 4 gauge. And in the back, we removed the capacitor because the capacitor, I believe, was causing a parasitic loss, and it just wasn't really benefiting the system overall. And removing it, by the way, is going to make this thing look a whole hell of a lot cleaner. So I'm going to have to rerun this wire and kind of run it along with that power wire just to make things all nice and clean. And obviously up front, I've got to wrap this red wire with conduit and then wrap it with tape and run it in a spot where it's not sticking out of the front of the hood. So there's still some work to do, but we have a success on our hands. This is a huge win. So we've confirmed that our battery has gone bad, and I'm not exactly sure how that happened. I mean, we have the hypothesis of the parasitic loss from the capacitor killing it. So obviously I had to take the battery out, take it down to AutoZone where I bought it. And while I was at AutoZone, I'm going to show you the picture. I noticed something. If you notice on the sticker that I'm showing up on the screen, this was a core return. They sold me a bad battery. Get in the zone, AutoZone. So that may have been the problem all along. So I don't know. We can't confirm that. So we're just have a brand new battery without a return sticker in the car, and we're going to hook everything back up and give it a try. So I got everything sorted out under the hood. I also modified the lid for the fuse box to accommodate the thickness of the new wire. I ran out of red electrical tape close to the end, so once I get the new roll, I just have to do like, this 12 inches or so left. Not a big deal. Everything else has run really nicely. It is obviously red to indicate that this has high charge. And just real quick before I leave, I'm going to throw a zip tie right here just to tie it to the AC line. I don't think it'll go anywhere after that. I know I said that I was mostly done with Prelude content, that I was going to move on to the Camaro. I actually am, in fact, working on the Camaro, as you can see in the background of this video. That said, this was not planned. This was an unplanned repair. This is the kind of thing that you just have to roll with when you have an old car. And I'm also really glad that I had the tools to diagnose it in my garage, because if I were to take this car down to AutoZone, they would say, oh yeah, battery's just fine. Oh yeah, the alternator's just fine, because it was only presenting a problem when the lights were on. And they don't do those kinds of tests in the parking lot of an AutoZone. So you're not going to find that at an AutoZone. You might find that at a mechanic shop, but having those tools at home gave me the power to diagnose this
and solve it on my own. And that can save you thousands of dollars, especially if they say, oh, well, the battery's bad. They'll just throw in a battery. And then you end up throwing parts at it that don't fix the problem. And it may seem like it's fixed for a while until the car just leaves you stranded again. Another thing that it allowed me to do was to test the results of my changes. And that's probably the most important part of having good diagnostic tools. And so I know this is a short video. Not everything can be a ground up refactor, even though this project did involve quite a bit of refactoring. I also did get to introduce myself to a new shop, to a new rebuilding specialist. So that was very cool. He doesn't know it yet, but I'm about to become a good friend of his because I've got more projects for him. I've got alternators, I've got generators, I've got starters. I'm going to be seeing this guy again. And the fact that he had the part on hand, ready to go, and the fact that it measurably performed is a huge win in my book, and we will be doing business again. And by the way, this is how you build community. You go to a shop, you introduce yourself, you take your part to them, you show them that you did your due diligence, and so they're not just selling you a part, you're not just some asshole walking in and walking out with a part. You're actually engaging them in a conversation, and you show your gratitude for their help. That's how you build community. And I also found out about this guy from Rick at Master Auto Parts. I found about him from my Uncle Don, who restores cars right around the corner from both of their shops. So there is community out there. So you have to get in with these communities if you want the best parts, if you want the best prices, and if you want referrals to other shops, because not everybody is going to have everything you need, and you're especially not going to get all of the answers you need from AutoZone. You're also not going to get them from O'Reilly. You're going to build a network over time of people that you can rely on for information about different subject matters, and that's how it's done. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you like what you see, like, share, subscribe, and comment. And if you don't like what you see, maybe you work for AutoZone, I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry. You made a choice. I used to work there, and I made a choice to get out. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.